Thank you very much, Sukhdev, and thank you all for coming out. I'm particularly pleased to be doing this with Andrew. It's hard to think of a more appropriate person. In some sense, this book is a piece of what Andrew does in Nice Work, if you can get it, which I highly recommend, and just kind of sort of a panoptic view that it provides of what's often called contingent labor, or more rarely on this side of the Atlantic, precarity, a state of precariousness that particularly sort of people in my generation find themselves in the labor market. And it includes just a whole kind of explosion of roles, from the rise of temps. The temporary help industry has exploded over the last 20 or 30 years. To obviously to internships, to various kinds of part-time arrangements, to various kinds of independent contractor and self-employment arrangements of all shades and colors, which have made the sort of classic image of a 9-to-5, 40-hour-a-week full-time employee. That kind of person is actually in the minority these days. That's our stereotype of what work is, but in fact, our conception has not caught up to the reality, which is that people work sort of all over the place in patches. They're underemployed, they're intermittently employed, they're self-employed. So in some sense, this book is just tackling or attempting to tackle one piece of the puzzle, the question of internships. And to some extent, what kind of drew me into this, or what I found kind of particularly fascinating about the idea of the internship or the intern, is that it was essentially a kind of undefined, under-theorized, unstudied kind of term or role. It's something that we're all familiar with. Except maybe the sort of my grandparents' generation. For whom the word intern still means kind of medical resident, right? Or at least a medical student in their first year of residency is what it's become. But otherwise, most people are familiar with the term. Probably among you all, you've either been an intern, your child has been an intern, or you know people who've done it. You've employed interns. It seems to be true of almost everybody these days, and yet. No statistics no reliable statistics have been collected. There's no commonly accepted definition of what an intern is, and it includes things from people working in the White House, unpaid, right in the Oval Office, to people working at Disney World flipping burgers. So it seems to include all these different kinds of roles, and yet, what does it actually mean? So to some extent, the approach that I take in the book is kind of a small c Catholic approach, just trying to kind of look at everything that is being called internship, look at all the places where this word is being applied, and try to see is there a common denominator. And to some extent, what I felt was that in fact it was more of a kind of a marketing term, more of a buzzword than actually a kind of real descriptor, not an objectively defined kind of term. That in itself is interesting because, traditionally speaking, a job term was just a sort of descriptive sort of thing, but this is a marketing term, something that is sort of sold to people, and that kind of speaks to a larger ambiguity in the whole internship economy, which is that, this is to some extent a way to get young people to naturalize the phenomenon of working for free. I think that my premise in the book, and to some extent the kind of thinking behind it, was maybe a very old-fashioned kind of thinking that you get paid for work, that there is a basic kind of equation between hard work and then monetary compensation. That was the way that modern financialized, cash-based economies work. Of course, there are all kinds of different gift economies, and there's a lot of complexity to that. But essentially, that notion has been very, very subtly kind of undermined, and you now have, as I estimate, probably 1 to 2 million people working as interns in the U.S. each year, and as many as half of them working unpaid. So how did we get here? How did this happen? Maybe I'll just kind of try to provide a little potted history as I try to in the book. And again, I was attempting to kind of piece this together because nobody had tried to tell the story. Nobody had tried to kind of draw out this genealogy. So if the book kind of appears to be sort of an initial attempt, I mean that's just what it is. It's an attempt to kind of frame the question, to sort of lay out what is known, to build up a kind of empirical base, and also a mental model for thinking about this issue. Because my ultimate goal is just to bring this question in some sense out of the shadows, out of the kind of unconscious, the collective unconscious, where we all know that internships exist. It's something we do. It's a reality we reckon with, but we don't think consciously about it. We don't think about how to improve the system, the overall way that things work. Of course, people try to think about how to improve their own situation or improve things for their intern if they're an employer, perhaps. But nobody's thinking about it systematically. Nobody's thinking about it as an object of rational, conscious public policy. And I think it's an important enough issue. And the core issue, just to kind of pan out a little bit, is how do you get young people into the workforce? And in this case, usually specifically into the white-collar workforce. How do you move students, especially from Psych 101 classrooms in a building like this, into the office jobs where they will probably be in our service economy? What is that process? What's the best way to do that? What's the most humane way to do that? And what's the way that ensures the sort of highest level of social justice that's possible in terms of making that an equitable process? And I essentially find this current, very haphazard, unregulated, free-for-all system of internships that's grown up to be inadequate, to sort of fail our tests of what would be a rational, humane, and even efficient way of getting people from point A to point B, just to kind of see it on a very macro level. But anyway, potted history. So internships originate, the term intern, originally from French, probably for several hundred years used in French hospitals as a term for junior doctors, kind of apprenticing doctors, and comes to the States probably sometime in the mid-19th century. The word itself at that time still spelled intern with an E at the end in a kind of French mode, and it essentially means a young doctor who is interned within the four walls of a hospital for a year or so, usually a couple of years, performing junior sort of tasks, bloodletting and maybe applying leeches still at that point, whatever it was. Some grisly things, probably overworked, possibly with some resemblance to today's interns, but in any case, working within a hospital before they get to become a full-on medical practitioner. And I think this is kind of more speculative, but I think there are probably a number of workplace practices that you can trace to fields like medicine and law, because these are prestigious fields that other fields want to copy. And that's certainly the case with internships. You see it become common practice in the medical profession in the early 20th century, just at the time when the medical profession is kind of rationalizing and modernizing itself, when they're shutting down. The country used to be full of kind of substandard medical schools, producing people of doctors of highly varying quality. And the American Medical Association in particular kind of steps in and says, we need to get rid of the quacks, we need to have certification, accreditation, all of these things which are arriving in the early 20th century in lots of different areas, but in medicine, one of the results is the internship as a period of applied postgraduate, as it were, kind of learning, a transition period between your school years in medical school, essentially, and your work as a medical practitioner. So those are the origins, and it takes a long time. It's essentially it takes several decades, not until the 1930s, 1940s, that you see other fields, other industries kind of looking to this internship model and borrowing the word. And as far